The same hormone that makes you loving toward your own family can make you colder toward strangers. That's oxytocin, the cuddle chemical. Robert Sapolsky's book Behave is built on findings like that one, and it ends somewhere most people refuse to follow. Stay with me. I'll show you where. That finding comes from research Sapolsky reviews in Behave. Oxytocin makes people more generous, more trusting, more loyal to their own group. Toward outsiders, the book shows it can make them more suspicious. Same molecule, opposite behaviors. Behave is Sapolsky's attempt to answer one question. Why did that person just do that thing? And he doesn't mean simple things. He means the hardest cases, the violence, the sudden kindness, the moment someone pulls a trigger or refuses to. His answer is not one answer. It's a stack of them, which brings us to idea number 1, the idea that reorganizes everything else in the book. Idea number 1. Every behavior has causes on many timescales at once. Sapolsky argues you can't explain an action by picking one cause. You have to run the whole chain backwards. Here's how the book does it. Picture something small. You're in traffic. Someone cuts you off, and you lean on the horn harder and longer than you meant to. Sapolsky's method. Ask what happened 1 second before. 1 second before, neurons fired. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detector, flagged that car before you consciously registered it. That's the first layer, measured in seconds. But the book keeps walking backwards. Minutes to hours before. Hormones. Sapolsky reviews evidence that testosterone doesn't manufacture aggression out of nothing. It amplifies whatever behavior already earns you status. And stress hormones, left over from your morning, make ordinary threats look larger than they are. Days to months before, your brain rewired itself. The book describes how sustained stress can shrink parts of the frontal cortex and enlarge the amygdala. Same traffic, different brain, because of a bad 3 months at work. Here's the twist. He doesn't stop at your lifetime. Adolescence, childhood, then the womb. Sapolsky reviews studies on how a mother's stress hormones during pregnancy can tune a fetus's stress response for decades afterward. Then genes, then culture. The book spends a long stretch on how the culture you were raised in shapes what an insult even feels like. Then centuries of ecology. Then millions of years of evolution. And the point, Sapolsky argues, is that none of those layers is the real explanation. They're all the same explanation, described at different zoom levels. Say it's genetic, and you've named one frame of a very long film. Question for you. When someone cuts you off and you erupt, how far back would you actually have to look to explain it? Hold on to that. It matters for the ending. Idea number 2. Your frontal cortex is the last part of your brain to finish, and it isn't fully mature until roughly your mid-20s. The frontal cortex, the book explains, is the part that makes you do the harder thing when the harder thing is the right thing. Delay gratification. Sit inside discomfort, not send a message. And Sapolsky highlights something strange about its schedule. Nearly every other brain region is largely finished long before. The frontal cortex is still wiring itself through your teens and into your 20s, until somewhere around age 25. Picture a 19-year-old at 2 in the morning, deciding whether to get in a car with a friend who's been drinking. The book's point. The regions screaming go, reward, peers, novelty are fully online already. The region that would say, wait, run the consequence, picture tomorrow, still under construction. Sapolsky is careful here, and so am I. That's not an excuse for anything. It's a description of hardware. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me. Sapolsky argues this delay isn't a design flaw at all. It's the point. Because the last region to mature is also the region least specified by genes and most shaped by experience. In other words, the book argues that evolution's move was to leave the most consequential part of your brain deliberately unfinished so that the world could finish it. Your environment gets a vote. Sapolsky spends entire chapters on this. The evidence, the caveats, the uncomfortable implications for how courts treat young people. The full book is linked below if you want the version with all the footnotes. But here's what makes idea number 3 land so hard. If your brain is partly built by context, then context should be able to move you around. And the book shows exactly how easily it does. Idea number 3. us and them. Sapolsky argues that context shapes behavior far more powerfully than character does, and the fastest-moving context of all is which group you've decided someone belongs to. The book reviews research showing your brain sorts people into us and them in well under a tenth of a second, faster than you consciously recognize a face. Before you have an opinion, you already have a side, and the categories are absurdly flimsy. Sapolsky describes experiments where people are split into groups by something as arbitrary as a coin flip, and within minutes, they favor their own group and rate the others as less trustworthy. Picture your commute again. Same driver cuts you off. Now, imagine their car carries a sticker for your team, then the other team. Sapolsky's argument is that your reaction just changed, and you would swear it didn't. Here's the twist that makes the book worth reading. Us and them isn't fixed. The lines get redrawn constantly. Sapolsky notes that the moment a shared threat appears, or a shared goal, yesterday's them quietly becomes today's us, which is why the book keeps returning to context over character. Ask whether someone is a good person or a bad person, and, Sapolsky argues, you've asked the wrong question. Ask what situation that person is standing inside. Now, the thing I promise we come back to, where behave actually ends up, because Sapolsky follows his own argument all the way down, and it takes him somewhere uncomfortable. Stack the layers. Neurons 1 second before. Hormones from that morning. A brain shaped by adolescence, by childhood, by a fetal environment, by genes, by culture, by evolution. Now, point at the part that is you, choosing freely. Sapolsky's answer, in the final section of the book, is that there isn't one. He argues there is no free will left over. No ghost standing outside all those causes, making some untouched decision. That is his claim, and it is genuinely his. Plenty of philosophers and scientists push back on it hard. But follow it, and you can see why the oxytocin finding opened this video. Same molecule, opposite behaviors, depending entirely on who is standing in front of you. If the chemistry carries no moral direction, the book argues, then biology alone doesn't either. Context supplies the direction, and Sapolsky is careful about what this does and doesn't mean. He argues it doesn't mean dangerous people simply walk free. A car with failed brakes still gets taken off the road. What it changes, the book suggests, is the story we tell about why. Less this person is rotten. More this system produced this outcome. And here is what would change the output. So, 3 ideas. 1. Every behavior is causes stacked from 1 second to 1,000,000 years, and no single layer is ever the whole answer. 2. Your frontal cortex finishes last, around 25, because it is meant to be built by your world rather than fully specified by your genes. 3. Context beats character, and the us-them line your brain draws in a tenth of a second is far easier to redraw than you would ever guess. Sapolsky's own suggestion at the close of the book is modest. When you catch yourself explaining a person with a single cause, add 1 more layer, then another. It changes what you see. The full book is linked below. It's long, it's dense, and the parts we skipped are the best parts. If this rearranged something in your head, the next explainer is 1 click away.